and continue learning more. And so that's really what you guys are seeing as the product of about 4 to 5 years of learning and evolving. That being said, I don't know if you know this, but the fear of public speaking is actually the most common fear. And I have it. It's designed to be interactive. The more questions you ask, the less I have to talk, which is better for everybody. So please, if you do have questions, if I say something that just sounds wrong or doesn't make sense, ask them while I'm going through it. Don't wait to the end. Okay? Deal. So the thought for today was we were going to start out with just kind of a brief overview of what do we mean when we say crisis and crisis response? What do we mean when we say trauma care? And then this afternoon after church, we're going to get a little more in depth with the actual how we do this and then maybe actually do some practice time. Okay? So start out. Why would you even be doing this? Why would we ever ask you to have healing conversations? So when we talk about trauma care, some people jump right in and they're thinking like bandages and wrapping people up. And, other people are thinking like psychoanalysis and how do we get to the heart of the issue? This is neither of those things. So after we named it trauma care and told the whole world that that's what we were doing, we decided that actually is the best way to describe it. So the way that we started describing it was healing conversations, right? Helping people process what they've been through. And then we started hearing people be like, well, why would we offer this training? Why should our people start doing this? And the reality is right now, people are struggling. Every single one of us can name somebody in our lives, maybe somebody in this room, that is struggling with something, whether it's an illness, a loved one who's aging, a death in the family, a loss of a job, you name it. We all have people in crisis all the time. That is both true inside the church and even more so outside of the church. And so this really becomes an opportunity for you to go on mission. We don't teach this strictly as an evangelism tool, but it is a really important, powerful way for you to engage people both inside the church and outside of the church. It's also biblical. I mean, we talk about in Romans, it says mourn with those who mourn. In Ecclesiastes, it goes through, there is a time for weeping. There is a time for us to be coming alongside people who are struggling, to be supporting them, to be encouraging them, to be offering them help and hope. And so this is one tool that can be used to engage the world, to go on missions. We do believe that in the wake of every crisis, whether it's a small personal crisis or whether it's global like COVID was, or regional, something like a hurricane or a flood, in the wake of every single crisis, there is a mission field created. There is an opportunity to engage people for the spread of the gospel. Make sense with me so far? We're going to pretend like you didn't just read that. How would you guys describe a crisis? How would you define it? This is an interactive portion that I told you was coming.
I wasn't looking, so I didn't see the answer. And something that would affect somebody in a way that would change their lives. It could be one person, it could be many people.
Absolutely true. Anybody else? When you hear the word crisis? You pretty much had it, so well done. The way that we describe it is anything that disrupts the normalcy of life. It's going to cause a change in your life, right? And then response. So we picked our name really intentionally. We're not disaster relief, we're crisis response. Because crisis is broad, it gives us more opportunities to engage. And then response, if you think like old school call and response in churches, they give out the call, then there's an answer, there's a response. And so that's us. We are responding with the answer. The answer is the gospel. The answer is the love of Christ. And so that really informs all that we do. When we go in after a crisis, the most obvious needs are usually the physical ones. If you think about it, anytime you've ever seen a natural disaster, people are talking about how do we get fuel? How do we get food? How do we get water? After the death in a family, people show up with casseroles for days or weeks, right? We don't know how to fix it. We can't make it better. Here's some hot dish. All right. So those are often the obvious needs. But when we interact as a ministry, we want to engage all of our needs. We want to engage the spiritual, the relational, the emotional, the intellectual, and the physical. So for crisis response, engaging the physical might look like hosting short-term teams from churches and helping people gut their homes and rebuild their homes. Internationally, it can look a lot of different ways. We provide money to do job training. We provide, in some cases, really what they do need is clean water to drink so that they can survive. And we've been able to hook them up with some water filters that are actually like really effective, useful tools. For you guys, it might look like showing up with that casserole after somebody loses a loved one. But then when we talk about going deeper, we talk about engaging the relational, the emotional, the intellectual. That's those healing conversations, right? If they can start to engage on those levels, then you have something that's moved from a transactional ministry, which is where you set up like a meal train. Somebody has a baby and you set up a meal train and people provide food for a new family. That's a transaction. They have a need, you're meeting the need, that's the end of it. But if you set up a meal train and you have people visiting at appropriate hours to help them with some of their mental and emotional needs, now you have the opportunity for it to be transformational. It goes deeper. It can actually change their life. That concept makes sense? Transformational versus transactional. And when we talk about the greatest need, as Christians, we believe that the greatest need that anybody can have is a relationship with Christ. Right? What does it matter if you're well fed if you aren't saved? And so that is, again, it's the goal. It's the formation of all that we do. So basic trauma care is about helping people cope and helping people process. How many of you guys like to fix problems? I'm a big fixer. You can ask my husband. That's not what we're talking about today. I'm so sorry. I just like to get that out of the way so everybody can we can process your disappointment later. What it is about is one tool on the journey in the process of helping people deal with what they're experiencing. The goal is to be able to develop meaningful relationships, right? When you show up for somebody in their hour of need and you can just be there with them in it's meaningful. It creates a bond that then you can build on. And the goal would be, again, not necessarily that you present the gospel that same day, but that you're developing a relationship that will open the door for the spread of the gospel. Our goal is to influence people towards Christ. So if you've ever done any evangelism training, they usually tell you that it's not a one and done kind of scenario. Very rarely do you stand on a corner and tell somebody the gospel and they agree and they pray and it changes their life. And not to say that God can't do that, but most evangelism is more about influencing people on a path towards Christ. Our goal is connection, not conversion. When a crisis happens, people do one of two things. They move towards God or they move away from God. I can't think of a single time I've ever met somebody who says, I'm completely stagnant in my relationship with Christ through this experience. That being said, it can affect different people in different ways. I know my family went through a tragedy when I was a kid. Actually, went through a couple. We were really close together. I moved closer to Christ. My brother moved in the exact opposite direction. And so our goal is always to just get people to move closer to Christ. In some cases, if you're coming alongside believers, it might just be about encouraging them. Keep moving closer to Christ. If you're coming alongside somebody who doesn't have a foundation of faith, it might be acknowledging the possibility that there is a God. So there really is quite a range, right? And when we're dealing with people, we want to be able to meet them where they are. So I know this is really tiny and hard to read for some of you guys in the back. You all sat in the back. Well done. We're going to go through it and just kind of explain. I think this can be really helpful for people. If it confuses you, ignore it. All right. So pre-disaster, think, what do you guys have around here? You have blizzards, right? Blizzard coming. You get a warning. There's about a day or two of people in the news telling you that the world is about to end because it's going to snow. Okay. Go to the store, you buy up all the milk and bread, and you're good. And then it hits. And now you're stuck in your house with your kids who haven't been able to go to school for 3 days. They're all hopped up on sugar. That's your impact. And then there's the honeymoon period where you kick the kids out of the house and the whole neighborhood goes outside and you're all shoveling at the same time, right? And you love your neighbors and it's great. And then you start to take inventory. Okay, now you haven't been able to go to work, which means that your budget is all messed up and the kids haven't been able to go to school, so their schedule's all messed up. This is obviously not the biggest crisis that we could talk about. But then you hit, and by like 2 days of being snowed in, you are so over this. And then you get to go back to school and you get to come back to work and you get to work your way through. And then you get to tell stories about the blizzard of 2024 or 2025, and it's a great memory. And you can actually come out better than it was. Slightly more serious example, right? The death of a loved one. If they're sick for a while and they're in the hospital, you know it's coming, and then they die. And then your community, your church rallies around you and they show up with their meals and everybody visits and everybody texts you, how are you doing? And then after about 2 or 3 weeks, they stop visiting. And now you've got to start making decisions about, did you contact all of the right people? Did you go through all the right lists? Did you file all the right paperwork with the bank, with the life insurance, with all of those things? And then you start looking at the closet that's full of clothes and what are you going to do about that? And so those days, weeks, months after, we actually find that people are more in grief than they are immediately. Also, if you think in terms of car crash, right, people can be in shock. They don't even realize how bad the damage is until later. So there may be an opportunity to use trauma care immediately after. There may also be an opportunity to have these healing conversations days, weeks, months, sometimes even years after a crisis. So the ultimate goal would be that people can work through their grief, that they can process through it and end up in a better place than they were before. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. But again, if we focus on the spiritual goal, and the goal is to get them to move closer to Christ, if they ultimately become closer to Christ through this experience, then they end up in a better place than they were before. With me.
So if you're going to work with somebody later on, you want to be at the beginning, correct? So you build that whole relationship as they're going through that, or you want to come in after all the church family leaves and everything? It was just, how do you guys do that at the beginning, or stay with them for a couple more years, or you just come in after?
Okay, so ideal.
Okay.
That you know them, that you can walk with them through this whole process, that you can be somebody that points them to Christ through the whole process. Reality is, you're not going to be able to do that for everybody all the time. Because these never happen in a vacuum. Everybody has crises of different scales going on at different times, all the time. So what you may find, these true, might be that this crisis actually reminds them of a different crisis that they never fully processed. So while processing this one, they're actually thinking about the other one. Maybe you're here for this one, but you weren't there for that one. You do what you can. But good question. If you guys have watched the news ever in the last couple of years, you've probably heard rates of depression, rates of anxiety, rates of suicide, they're all going up. The importance of mental health cannot be overstated. And I know nothing about your church and how you've handled it, but the American church as a whole has not always handled this subject well. We're trying, we're playing catch up. And in a lot of ways, it's gotten a lot better. But the effects of your mental and emotional health can impact every other aspect of your life. How many of you guys, when you get stressed, or specifically, I find ladies, you feel like you just can't remember anything? That your ability to focus or process or even remember where you put your grocery list, it's gone. It's not just you, it's not in your head. The way that your brain works as you experience kind of a crisis and it triggers that fight, flight, or freeze, it changes the way that blood flow in your brain actually is focused. And so it can reduce your mental capacity up to 50%. I find that so encouraging. It is not just me being a basket case. It actually is the way that God wired our bodies to function. That being said, intellectually, it can make you indecisive. Emotionally, it can make you depressed. Relationally, it takes a toll on your marriage, on your family, on your relationships outside of your home. Spiritually, again, it can make you lean more on Christ. It also can create isolation where you stop praying because you just don't even know what to say anymore. It can create anger at God. The way that we think, the way that we feel, it all influences the way that we behave. So it really, really is important that the church get better at addressing mental and emotional needs. God created us with a variety of needs. God created the church to be able to respond to a variety of needs. And so if we are equipped, you have these tools, you can engage. How many of you guys have ever thought like, oh, wow, they're really going through something. I wish I knew what to say. Hard. We're going to discuss that a little bit more later. But the reality is we want to provide you with tools. Obviously, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not the one tool that's going to work in every situation and give you the answer all the time. But it is one thing that we can use. A few years back, there were two tropical cyclones, what they call hurricanes, that hit the country of Mozambique, one right after the other, 6 weeks apart. Massive flooding, death and devastation. People ended up in refugee camps. About a month after the second storm, we sent people to Mozambique to meet with a group of pastors. And they said, all right, well, when you're asking people what they're feeling, what are people saying? Pastors looked very confused. They said, well, when you're asking people how they feel, pastors go, we don't do that. Why? That seems very basic. Why aren't you asking people? Well, because everybody feels horrible. Things are horrible, and we can't make it better, so why would we ask? And it was completely outside the realm of their thought process. They couldn't fix it, So why would they even ask? And I think so often we're paralyzed by that. We want to be able to fix things. We want to be able to make them better. We need to be able to make them better. If you're like me and you're like, I need to fix this, I need to make it better. But so we went into the trauma care training. We went into how to help people share their story, how to help people process. When they got to one of the first refugee camps, this guy was so desperate to share with people that even though he couldn't speak any of the same languages that our team spoke, he was drawing in the mud and gesturing and speaking in a language that we couldn't understand just to be able to tell his story. And it didn't matter that we couldn't understand it. It mattered that he got to tell it. So at the end of the training, we sent the pastors back to the camps. They were able to make connections. They were able to start listening to people. 17 people prayed to receive Christ. But not only that, people were encouraged. Community was created in a refugee camp where people just lost all of their community. So it really creates a powerful platform to be able to start things like Bible studies, to be able to start things like prayer groups. And so you have just this really incredible, really powerful opportunity to engage with people. So my husband's family, they own pizzerias. There's one over in Alpha, New Jersey. I work there about 1 or 2 nights a week just to kind of help out on the schedule. Last night I was taking a call, and the woman on the phone is asking me questions about the size of the salad. And then she tells me, well, my husband just got diagnosed with cancer, so I think I'm going to be eating this salad by myself. And it was nuts. It was loud. I was taking the order as fast as I could. So I answered her questions about the salad. And then I got off the phone, and then it hit me like, wow, that was a major missed opportunity. Like, if she's sharing with a random person that's taking her meal order that her husband has cancer, that means that that's something she needs to talk about. So I grabbed the cousin up at the counter and I said, hey, when this woman comes in, I want to talk to her. If I'm not on the phone, like if there's any way possible, grab me. Well, 20, 25 minutes later, she came in to pick up her dinner. And I went up to her at the counter. I said, hey, I took your order. I wanted to just clarify because it was really loud. Did you say that your husband was sick? And she just went into it, the whole story. He has renal cancer. It's not metastasized. They don't know what the next steps are. This woman is pouring out her life standing at the pizza counter because that's how desperate people are to connect right now. So I get the opportunity to pray for Karen and for her husband, Ron. It works all over the world. It works whether you speak the same language. It works whether you know them and you have history and you've been with them through everything, or whether it's a 2-minute conversation. So this afternoon, we're going to go through how to have healing conversations, how to ask powerful questions to draw people out, how to listen well once they start sharing. But the reality is, the more you practice this, and it is something you have to practice because it's not natural. But the more you practice this, you're going to find opportunities. I am the person that can go into the grocery store and get somebody's life story. I love this. Usually, almost always, it's when I'm in a hurry and I have to go somewhere and I came in for one item. And now the cashier or the woman behind me in line or the woman in front of me, they're telling me their life story because people are desperate to connect. More than ever, we are hearing people say that they are isolated, that they don't have a community. And if you think about it, outside of church, it's a lot harder to create and foster true, deep community. We have a gift, and we want to be able to share that with people. And this is one of the tools that we can use to do that. I feel like we've kind of covered this, but give me some ideas. Your turn to talk. What are the things that you know of, either in your family, in your life, in your community? What are people struggling with? What are the crises?
I know this is like not on a scale, but it doesn't seem to get very sunny up here. And I think that really brings people down, especially the people who can't get out. And so I think that makes them feel even more isolated. And then the ice comes and the cold weather, and it just even isolates them more.
Yes.
This one's up there, but I think widowerhood, kind of a long term, like
Yeah.
decades later, the loneliness and things that come with it.
I work with people who are drug addicts and alcoholics and just coming out of prison and are homeless and jobless. So it's, yeah. And I'm not a counselor, I'm more peer support because I struggle with addiction too. I'm in recovery, but so since I can relate, they pour out their story.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, that's pretty high and people don't know, a lot of people aren't aware of what people go through addiction and right after coming out of jail and institutions, the hardships, because they have such a hard time finding home and finding jobs because nobody wants them. And so they feel like abandoned,
Yep.
So
Wow. Unfortunately, I feel like that's an area where there's a lot of need.
I think a lot of this falls under just being loved where you are, having people don't feel like they're loved where they are. They feel like they don't live up to the standard of the person they're talking to, or that person judging them, or instead of loving that person and where that person is in their life at that moment in time. They know that they're loved. They know that they're just being judged. People they're trying to tell their story, but nobody really listens to them anymore. Just, we're passers by. It's like you say hi to somebody, hey, how's it going? And you just keep on walking. No for an answer. You don't really care how it's going. You don't really care how someone's doing. And that's what I think the biggest thing is, that people just don't feel understood, loved, cared about. I drive a short bus for county, so I deal with people along who have those issues. And you can tell when they talk, they feel like unseen, unheard, and unknown.
Yeah.
We see a lot of instability in families around our area.
Okay.
And certain people are involved in them for a lot of youth in those sort of situations.
Yeah.
And now you've got teenage challenges, but sometimes I drive for a school band and I see younger kids, 5 years old, 6 years old, really struggling with different things. And then I had an opportunity to talk to a mother about some things, and it's just like family struggling because a child is misbehaving in school, so that they are thinking it's parents' fault, and why aren't you taking care of this child? And so it's all that stuff going on, and it's like when I went to the parent and I thought, your child will be on my school van for the rest of the year. I am not going to kick this child out. And I just saw a different look on her face, like someone is finally agreeing me that helping me out here with my son. So I think that.
On that same line, I drove a school bus for a couple of years too. And I made it a point for myself, this wasn't for their benefit, but for myself, I wanted to learn their names. So I would learn their names. I had 60 kids on the school bus, and I knew everyone by name. I would say hi to them use their name every time they got on the van or bus, and every time they got off the bus. So that was 4 times a day. I would say their name to them. And along with what she said, the kids are very similar, because by the end of the year, those kids would not walk past me until I said their name.
Kids are great that way. They're great reflections of all that we do. You had your hand up at one point.
I know, it's probably not related to this, but when you talk about lost loved ones, it's really hard because my mom lost her brother, and it was May 14th, and she was so brokenhearted, and I knew she knew Christ. It was that Friday, it was around June 14th, a month later, before June 14th. She's like, you know what, sweetheart, I might not know Christ then, but I know him still. Oh.
And do you know my brother? I am Sunday morning. June 14th, a month later after me. He loved her brother. And her brother knew Christ too, but it was so hard. I really believe that my mom lose her brother, but Steve, he knew Christ. And it was so hard. They were above her. And I'm so thankful that I was able to be there Friday to lead her to the Lord before she died. And my sisters were so angry because I wasn't there that Sunday when she died because I was at church person. Worship God, worship of God. They called me, they were so angry because I was at church worship God. And I said, stop angry with me. Because I made peace with it Friday. And if God thought I didn't make peace with it, he would have had me there that morning. At 9 a.m. when my mother suffered a congestive heart failure. It had been 4 years since I felt that my siblings are still angry with me. But guess what? God knows my heart. And I am reminded of my mother every morning when I look in that mirror. They're not only angry with me that I was not there for my mom when she passed, they're angry with me more so because I look like her. And I pray to God that that will be the reason they will enter the church. And I don't need to get upset about it. I'm so grateful that I heard that moment. And because I pray to God, my son goes to this church. I struggled to get him to church for the last 5 to 7 years, but he's been coming here for 6 months. So thank you for listening to me, brothers and sisters. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I am, I think it's my life. It just said each person facing a trial of life and struggles differently. The, like before I know Christ, I came here as a teen. It was really a struggle and a lot of pain, loneliness, and all these things. But I am not the one all like to, I don't know, it's just a culture we don't express. So that time I was not a child of God. So I dealt with I dealt with a lot of tears. It's just incredible. It's just a tear, cry all by myself and all these things. And now I look back and thank God it is the tears was a healing me, my eyes and all these things. Because right now my eyes, I always thought to my husband after I marry or something, I'm more happy or something. Seldom had tears, so my eye had problem. I don't know. I just think when for those years I was crying and crying, really, same and nobody know because I'm not that culturally not the kind of person to express it. And even with fear, dealing with so much fear and all these things. So I think people who know Christ and people who don't know Christ dealt differently. I almost end my life with guilt, but thank God, that He preserved my life for all those years. And then, know Christ, it's hard for me to talk, even to women. So when I become a Christian, I ask God, please give me one or two ladies that know God, that I can pray and all these things, but I still could not. And for me, I learned so much that when I become a Christian, I cry before God. And I think that you don't know what to do. That's why when I have a crisis, I learned at 2010 February, I have a major crisis. And then I learned to read the Psalm, and I saw that how David expressed it to God. So I learned it. I knelt down and learned and cried and all these things. I still do that. So, but dealing with differently and healing is really precious when honestly God. That's why I think that we have to during this to know that the people, because each one of them face their trauma emotionally differently. I know we cannot just rush them to know Christ, but the best thing is also build a relationship to me. Couple of friends, build a relationship and to lead them to Christ. And now I have a friend, used to be my roommate, but they live in New Jersey now. So all of a sudden my roommate is quiet, but her husband sent a email to me and described. It's just so I told Mom, I even told her, I write to them, I said, I just could not imagine you face this crisis daily. Like he had an accident, he could not walk. They are devoted family to God. And they have just told me that the daughter is depressed and in hospital because of the depressive mode or bipolar or something. And the wife used to be my roommate, never write to me, but the husband, So I pray for them. I just asked Mark if we could go, find out how long you move here. It must be short distance than New York. He told us a little bit more shorter the distance, like 3 hours. Mm-hmm. So I pray that maybe one day visit him and the whole family. In the meantime, I just encourage them, through the email and all these things. I just want to say that I think everybody faces crisis before Christ, before you know Christ, and after you know Christ. At least this is my life story.
Yeah.
And especially when people cry during the trauma, we really let them cry. So many times I thought the family, we have a girl, but we don't have boy, but they say that when the boy fell down and cried, and I said, boy, don't cry. Or something like that. Yeah. I don't think we should cry. I think tears are very good. Yeah.
We get to it a little bit later, actually, but we've had people who ask, like, well, what if you're trying to have these healing conversations and the person starts crying? And my impulse is to be like, well, then you get up and leave. You don't even make eye contact. But the answer is it's okay if they cry. And then I've had other people, I can handle women crying all day long. Guy starts to tear up, I'm gonna bawl. I don't know why. It's physiological. I don't understand it. It's okay. I think some people are afraid that if they start listening to people who are going through crisis, that they might themselves be sad. That's okay. If people are crying, it's okay to cry with them. In fact, it's biblical. But that being said, when you're doing this, you don't want your emotions to overpower or to cloud out theirs. So we'll get a little more to that. But yes, I think that is a really, really important thing. Culturally, it varies a little bit from culture to culture. I'm married into a Sicilian family. They're very expressive. They're not worried about who's going to see their emotions. My father's family, English, totally different. You can't even make eye contact with them, but they'll continue talking as long as you don't look at them. It depends. And so some of that we'll talk a little bit more about is just learning how to read people and how to match kind of where they're at. Like you said, meeting people where they are. Anybody else have anything they wanted to share? So I thought we could end this just a little bit early. I really appreciate you guys coming out. I wanted to be able to answer any questions you had about crisis response or about trauma care. So I left lots of time for questions. Maybe too much. Yes, sir.
I do want to share, I was on a missions trip back in the beginning of summer to the border of the United States and Mexico. And I've been on other mission trips, but I've never been to the border. And actually, I'm taking with what I've experienced from the past years to use on the border. And it turned out to be something that I was totally on my way. And this was a totally different application.
Yep.
I mean, the translator that I had, he was Mexican. He would say the first thing that you do is you don't go in there and start how we would visit somebody and start sharing the gospel with them. You ask them about themselves.
Absolutely.
And when you do, kind of won them over for you to be able to tell about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We went in to visit this one lady, and she just, as she was sharing, I was totally out of my league. I'm saying, I don't even know what to say to this lady. She shared with me the details of everything that went on in her life and how she got where she's at now, where she went to the border. She was kidnapped by the cartel. The cartel sold her to another cartel, and that cartel released her. And she ended up beaten many times, and she ended up as being a housemaid at some house somewhere in the Phoenix, Arizona area. She was able to escape that and get back into Mexico. Now, the areas that we were serving in were refugee camps that housed hundreds up to thousands of people from all different kinds of countries. But meanwhile, as I'm saying, this lady finally got to that because in those refugee camps, these people here are legally trying to get into the United States, not illegally. And it's become so difficult for them to get into the country legally because of the stuff that's going on. Mm-hmm. They give each one of those persons a number when they register and a cell phone because that's the only contact they have. And he was sharing with me that they gave me my number. And she goes, I was number 164,000. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, how long is this list? But meanwhile, I get back to what I want to say is this lady was crying and crying all through her story. And I said, okay, what can we do? And she goes, I would like to do a Bible study with you. That's all she wanted. So I had to leave at that particular moment. I came back that afternoon and we did a Bible study. And she was a completely different person. A lot of those people in the refugee camps, every one of them had a Bible, because the one that I was at was run by a bunch of volunteers who shared the gospel. And during her crying and everything, she goes, "But you know, I'm trusting God. God will take care of this for me." And then she'd start crying, "But God will take care of this." And then we sat down that afternoon to do a Bible study. And her countenance was totally different when we had Bible study than she was in the morning. But this morning, I guess I'm saying out of all of this is that it was one of those events that the table was turned on me. I became the student and she was the teacher.
Yeah.
Because I see this in their lives that, boy, they need a platform to share what's going on in their lives. And then you get that opportunity to do a Bible study, and this lady is thrilled with that.
Yeah.
With that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's amazing how often when we say yes to God and we go thinking like, all right, we've got what we need, we find ourselves completely in over our heads. And yet God still uses us and he still does amazing things. And, you know, we could talk about, when you listen to people, when you create that opportunity for them to share, it really can be so powerful. So one of the things I want to do is just share like trauma care done well. After Hurricane Ian, we were down in a community in Florida. So it's in the US. These are people that are, you know, for the most part, middle class, some of them upper middle class. They've grown up in the US. There are churches literally all around them. It's not that they never had the opportunity to hear the gospel, but crisis creates the opportunity to talk to people who are never going to walk into a church. And so we were in this community, we were gutting homes immediately after Hurricane Ian, and we came across a homeowner named John. And one of our staff said to John at the end of the day, they've gutted his home. We do this because we want you to know that God loves you. And he stopped her right there. He goes, "No, he doesn't. Not me. God doesn't love me." And she took that kind of as a personal challenge. And so we've been working in that community for 2.5 years now. And we were working in John's house for months. We gutted it. We helped him fix it out. If he had insurance, it definitely wasn't sufficient, which is a story we hear all the time. But we sent team after team after team, and they loved on him, and they worked with him, and they prayed with him. And John was somebody, he was in decent physical shape. He was reasonably skilled at construction, so he was actually able to work in his home alongside the teams, which is the best case scenario. And after about 2 weeks, our staff person says, "Hey, John, God loves you." And he goes, starting to believe that. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, she goes, "Hey, John, God loves you." He goes, Yeah, I know. And after about a year, long after his home was finished, he started going to church. Didn't even tell us. How rude. But he started going to church. And then he casually brought it up a couple weeks later. "Hey, I've been going to church." And then he got baptized. And he told us after the fact, so we couldn't be there. And now he hosts a Bible study in his house. And they started with our trauma-based Bible study called Beyond Disaster. We're actually rewriting a new one because Beyond Disaster is really great at helping people process crises in a biblical framework, but it doesn't have as a really clear presentation of the gospel. And we wanted our Bible study to end with a very clear presentation of the gospel. So we're working on a new study. But John went through Beyond Disaster, and then they just started studying the Bible. And then our staff, we move around the country a lot as things happen, as our life changes. So the guy that was working there in Bible study left. And we said to John, like, I don't know if we're going to be able to get another guy right away. Like, we might have to just see what happens. And John says, that's okay. Whether we have somebody to help us or not, we're still going to meet in our house and we're still going to study the Bible. And so that is a really great picture of what it can be, right? That's the goal. We met him. He was in crisis. He was far from God. He turned towards God. He moved closer to God. He accepted Christ. He got baptized. He's going to church. That's the ideal. It's not always going to look like that, but it can. It can be that simple as just walking with people through their daily lives, reminding them, whether you actually say the words, God loves you or not, but reminding them regularly that God loves them, that God cares for them, that God sees them where they are, that he cares for them. And then being able to share the gospel and then being able to walk with them as they grow in their faith and as they become disciples. I think just based on the couple scenarios that you guys already listed, you have great platforms to be able to take this and use this and share the gospel and watch God transform your community. So I'm really excited.
Jen, thank you all for coming. Yes, thank you so much, Jen. I just want to thank you and just pray for us. And those of you at home, if you want to join us in prayer, we just really want to pray. The Lord would give us opportunities to be able to minister to those in our lives who are in great suffering with the hope of Christ. So would you join me in prayer? Father, I do thank you so much for Jen. I thank you for the giftings that you've given her to be able to share with us this morning and this afternoon as well. And Lord, it's just always encouraging to know that even in those times when we don't feel equipped, may not have the exact same experiences as people do as they experience their particular crisis, or that we know that your word trumps experience, that your spirit trumps experience. And Father, we thank you that you've given us all that we need to be able to come alongside people and love them the way that you've called us to. So we thank you so much that you do give us these chances, and we ask that you open up more doors for us to be able to use some of the skills, some of what you've already given us in your word and through your spirit.